It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogstide Network, the show where we look at the dollars and the cents of the sports media business empire and all of its ancillary, corollary, and collateral effects and damages. How you doing today, Steve?
I'm doing all right. It's kind of a weird time in the sports calendar. It's so busy with on court, on field stuff, but at the same time, it's like the behind the scenes drama is almost more interesting. You know,
Yeah.
it's just a strange time, and I'd like to just express my frustration with my Los Angeles Dodgers. It's just mind-boggling to me how a team as talented as they are can continually just lay a rotten egg in the playoffs. I just don't understand it. It's I was not happy, to put it that way.
I was going to offer. I had made a mental point to offer my condolences. So you scooped me, but yes, they do not seem very clutch.
No, they really don't. It's it's like if you really look at the stats, because that's what I do. There's only been one other time when a team that has been more than 20 games better than its opponent loses to that opponent in the playoffs, and that was in 1906. The Dodgers, that team, I think it was the Cubs. Don't quote me on the Cubs, but I think it was the Cubs. 23 games better than the opponent they lost. The Dodgers are 22 games better than the Padres, and they lost, which means you could argue that is the second worst choke job in the history of baseball, Major League Baseball.
And the worst in 100 years.
And the worst in more than 100 years. That's exactly right. It's just, I just don't understand it. I really just don't. And Dave Roberts, I mean, he's not helpful, to put it mildly. So I'm very upset, and now I have to go face all my Astros-loving colleagues. Which, because I'm...
Right, and they're up 2-0, right, already on the Yankees?
Yeah, as we're recording this on Saturday morning, so they're up 2-0 on the Yankees. And, I, of course, because I'm me, have been, violently obnoxious about my Dodgers this year. And so it blew up in my face, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's sports. And to lose to the Padres, too. I mean, it's one thing if they'd, they're one of their top rivals.
Well, that's the thing. They beat the Padres 14 out of 19 games in the regular season. I mean, it's sports, it happens, but when you just totally lay an egg over the course of 5 games, that's, and the Padres, I mean, it's like losing to your little brother,
Well, you could be, you could be the Nationals, where you seem to have supplied every playoff team with their core talent.
Well, yeah, that's true, including the Dodgers a year ago.
Yeah, and like Kyle Schwarber is crushing it. Obviously, Bryce Harper. Obviously, guys on the Dodgers. Obviously, Juan Soto. So yeah, that Nationals World Championship team is driving many playoff teams.
So there's actually a weird business story buried in there, and that the Dodgers, the way they manage their roster, is bizarre. In that trade with the Nationals is a part of it. What they do is they give up a whole bunch of assets at the trade deadline, and then they just let these players walk away. Like Max Scherzer, Trey Turner. Max Scherzer was there for 5 minutes. They paid a fortune for him, gone. Trey Turner is going to walk in the offseason, according to every Dodger rumor. So they would have been there a year, walk. Who cares what they give the Nationals? It doesn't matter. So somebody really needs to have a lesson in roster talent management with the Dodgers ownership.
Well, there you go. So sorry to Steve and Dodgers Nation there. It was another earlier than expected exit. Is a kind way to say it.
Yeah, it was a choke, okay? You can say it. It's okay. Just be blunt. They choked.
Well, we are going to spend pretty much all of our time, as Steve mentioned, this is actually pretty active. You got the NBA, NHL's kicking off. Baseball season is in its postseason, screaming towards the World Series. NFL is now in full swing. College football is in full swing. Heck, even college basketball, they're starting to warm up and get ready to kick off that season. So it's a very active time in sports. But the center of the universe is always the NFL. And when the 32 owners or their proxies gather for one of their owners meetings, a lot of news usually happens, but this one supplied us probably more stories than we could probably cover, even without our local interest in Dan Snyder being one of the main drivers of news and activity. So, Steve, let's dive into what happened when 32 of the most powerful people in sports gathered, which is with a little bit of a, they don't often gather in the season, and especially sort of in the throes of the season. So it was a little bit of an oddly timed owners meeting here in like week 6 or whatever it was.
Yeah, they have a quarterly meeting actually, but it just doesn't seem to make a bunch of news like this one did. So first of all, Chris, I don't know if you listened to the show 2 weeks ago when you were out. Alex and I spent 45 minutes just on the 30 or so page letter that Holland and Knight, which is Dan Snyder's law firm, had sent to the NFL. So I'm not going to reiterate all of that. So what we're talking about here today is just post letter. What has happened? Well, in essence, the sporting world wants the NFL to formally consider Dan Snyder for a departure from the NFL. And so the sports media, national sports reporters and everything all wondered, is the ownership going to have either formal or informal discussions at this meeting? The fun was kicked off when the NFL's other resident train wreck, Jim Irsay, in the lobby of this hotel, started mouthing off about Snyder. Somebody asked him, he's walking around the lobby, he met with the media. It looked like it was kind of an informal thing. They were just like standing there in the lobby. And somebody asked him about Dan Snyder, and his response was something to the effect of, well, yeah, I think the ownership should consider, should consider voting him out. He's a bad guy. And of course, this is Rich coming from Irsay, who, if you recall, had a DUI. He's a drug addict. His girlfriend, his mistress, died of an overdose. He's constantly like spewed all kinds of strange things out on social media and stuff. So it's, of all the guys, he's kind of a funny one. But so that was that was Irsay's part of it. And Snyder, of course, responded and in a letter and in typical Snyder fashion, kind of called Irsay a name or two and said this is all nonsense and the team has improved and blah blah blah. Roger Goodell responded and said, nothing. We're not going to consider anything until the Beth Wilkinson Mary Jo White investigation is over and the report is in. Jerry Jones, before the Irsay comments, Jones said something similar. Now, as it turns out, they didn't do anything at the owners' meeting relative to Dan Snyder. At least nothing that was reported in the media, nothing that came out. So it looked like they just sort of totally ignored Irsay's comments. But the trick is, here's what I want your opinion on first, Chris. Was this just Irsay being Jim Irsay and like spouting off whatever's on the top of his head, or was this a planned nugget that the ownership group decided to drop via Irsay?
Yeah, I have thoughts on that. First of all, it's just so amazing when you think about what you all talked about in the last show, the letter. Heck, even the bombshell ESPN article, those seem like old news, ancient history, news, news investigations.
It's like 6 months ago.
Yeah, they happen so fast that it's ridiculous. In fact, by the time you all are listening to this, I would guess there's at least one substantial story we didn't get a chance to talk about because it happened sometime after Saturday at 10 a.m. So it's just a whiplash speed. But back to your question. What I actually think it was intentional. Now, did Roger Goodell say go out there? Probably not.
No.
I think a faction of owners, and we have other stories here to show you that they are not 32 united front, if you ever thought that. But I think there was a faction that was very intentional. I don't think it was an accident, and I don't think it was an accident that it was Jim Irsay. Because if you think about it, one of the only pieces of kind of new news in the ESPN article, there was a lot of details and whatnot, but it really was just a long form case about stuff we mostly knew. It very well done, very well. It was almost like, lays out a case, but it was really more comprehensive than it was newsworthy. But the newsworthy part was this idea that Snyder's got an enemies list and he's got research, private investigators and all that. So to me, it was very intentional. You send out somebody like Irsay who's got he's already gotten in plenty of trouble, has a reputation, isn't really afraid, which he said, I'm not afraid of what Snyder can do to me. What's he going to do to me, basically, that I haven't already done to myself? I'm kind of an open book of being a mess. So you don't, it's not Mara. It wasn't Rooney they sent out there, right? They sent out the bad boy of the NFL, the guy that's already gotten plenty of trouble, the guy you really can't take down any further in some ways. Now, personal addiction issues and is different than stuff Snyder does, but
it's still a train wreck.
Yeah. So I think it's 100% whatever group decided that was a planned thing. That was not just Irsay, going off half cocked in the hallway of the hotel. I think it was very intentional. I think you send somebody out there that basically is like, come at me, bro, which he basically said. So I think, to me, that's what tells me that this was intentioned. And when you couple it with Al Michaels' commentary during the Thursday night Bears-Washington game a couple weeks ago at this point, Al Michaels is about as political and trench. I mean, this is a guy that has lunch with Goodell on a weekly basis type of deal, right? Like, you do not get more institutional NFL than Al Michaels. So Al Michaels doesn't just offhand. He has to get permission from the NFL. He has to get permission from Amazon, basically. Like, they don't deliver that message in the third quarter of a game. And then you have Irsay coming on the heels of that. That's telling me that these are planned skirmishes in this battle.
I tend to think you're probably right. And by the way, I don't know if you read it, Chris, but I wrote a really, really long piece on all of this. But it was before the Irsay comments, so of course, because like you said,
like leaving milk out.
Yeah, it really is. So, but go ahead and read my column, because it summarizes all that and gets into my thoughts on the stadium stuff and a bunch of other things. So, but anyway, yeah, I tend to think you're probably right. And Irsay is just the guy, if they're sitting in the room and ask for volunteers who wants to drop this bomb, it's a guy like Irsay is going to go, yeah, sure, I'll do it. Like you said, what can he possibly do to me? I got my mistress died of an overdose in public, for God's sake. There's nothing you can say about me that's possibly going to hurt me. So, whereas the others probably wouldn't want to risk Snyder's wrath. So, yeah, I tend to think you're probably right. And people need to understand that Al Michaels is, a 40-year NFL insider, maybe more. Maybe more than that. So it does matter. Now, it wouldn't matter so much if, like, the color commentator on, the Sunday afternoon game, which is some random NFL player retired 4 years ago, that's not necessarily a thing. But Al Michaels is a thing. So I tend to think that part of it is probably right. And I think the real discussion point, the other discussion point that flows from this is, what does ownership really think of Snyder? And what I've been saying for 2 years on this show, we've been saying that the best way to get rid of, I can't speak for you. What I've been saying, the best way to get rid of Snyder, if I was the NFL, is to put informal pressure on him. An intervention of sorts. Like you have your wayward cousin who's hooked on coke, and you really want to save him, so you sit him down in a room and you say, look, we ain't leaving this room until you agree to go to rehab. We're not. I don't care what you do. We're not leaving. That's kind of what needs to happen, minus the drug addiction, needs what happened with Snyder. And this is kind of what they're doing. It's a nugget here. It's a nugget there. Hey, look, Dan, we don't really support you. They don't want to just have a formal vote, which would be like the biggest NFL story in the history of the league. If they had this like formal, like, either a public vote or like they're electing a pope, behind closed doors, and the white smoke blows when they're done, that would be a nightmare for news, I think, for the NFL. So I do think that this is part of the pressure. And then you see these in ESPN story leagues. What was the key? What would be the key that we learned? A lot of the owners don't like him. We hadn't heard like that before. You kind of assume that because he's not on any committees or any value. He has no input into league governance. But you haven't expressly heard owners don't like him. So that's new. And so I think this is all part of, like you said, Chris, a part of a coordinated effort to put pressure on Dan Snyder.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you pay attention to to how legislative bodies work, there's a position called the whip, right? Which is their job is basically to backroom deal, sometimes go to a podium and put public pressure on a segment of Congress people, whatnot. I mean, I think there's very hard whipping going on to get them to 24 votes. Not that they necessarily take the vote, but in your scenario, which I think is the scenario that gets them out, or some version of that, they need those 24 votes in their pocket, right? Part of that sit down conversation has to be like, buddy, if you want, we can, like, there's 25 votes sitting right there, like they're already in our pocket. We'd rather not do that. We'd rather not do that to you. But we got the votes. And I think and I think probably a guy like Irsay is probably the chief whip, for the like get to 24 faction, there's a plenty of inside conversations thinking like, can we get to 24, which basically whether they pull that trigger or not gives them some insurance or gives them leverage in that negotiation with Dan, which I'm totally agree, which is the route they would prefer.
Now, I think the better analogy than my drug intervention is probably Nixon and Watergate. If you remember neither of us are really alive. Were alive to remember this firsthand. But what happened in Watergate is after the plumbers scandal, which was the break-in at the what's the name of that building? Watergate building in D.C. Yeah. The House impeached him, and then the Senate, they had the votes to convict, and they went to him and said, "You're going to be gone." They have the votes. And then Nixon left to avoid the embarrassment of being, drummed out, voted off the island, basically. And so that is what Chris is saying here, which is you go to him and say, hey, we got the votes. Don't make us do this, but we will. It's better for you. It's better for us. Better for you. Sell the team and leave. And you can just claim that you want to move on with your life and blah, 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 instead of getting formally drummed out. Because that is the play. And so I don't necessarily know if I agree that Irsay is the whip, because Irsay is kind of a mess. But somebody is. He may be one of them. But it's not like Jerry Jones is more like the Senate Majority Leader. He's not really the whip. He's too senior. And there's a group of people who, the Hunts, the Maras, the Rooneys, those folks, probably it's somebody lesser than that for sure. But regardless, it doesn't matter. Regardless, that is definitely what's going on. And that's what would get him out. If they go to him and say, we've done everything we can for you. We've been over backwards, but it's just over. It's over. And if you don't leave, this is going to happen. And listen, I can think of worse fates than having a gross $5 billion sale to fund the rest of my life. So even if his net is
conservatively $5 billion,
but even if his net is only $2 billion, break my heart. And he's already rich, so I mean, there's worse fates. It's not like he's getting fired from his 9 to 5.
I was thinking about because my mind wanders to this issue when it's at rest, and I was thinking, I am rooting for one of the people that I hate most in the world to get $6 billion.
Exactly. That's right. If that's what it takes for this guy to go, then take your money and go.
But to me, the ESPN article, and I know you guys talked about this a little bit, but I think another path is open, which is just another leverage point, right? Another path. It's longer. It's hard, it's another going to be sticky, but I do think the NFL wants him out. That's not up for debate. Like they want him gone. We can detail the reasons why they would want him gone, but that's not. There's no pro Dan Snyder faction, right? Like they would love to have a magic switch and just get him gone. And obviously taking a vote, obviously the sort of like backdoor convincing, but the other piece of leverage they have, which really emerged in the ESPN article to me, was that they see a squeeze play going on here with the stadium. So because they can trust, or that in this scenario, they trust that DC, Maryland, Virginia are just not going to play ball. And, hey, all the evidence and data we have in front of us would suggest that's a good bet. And I mean, he's being investigated by 2 to 3 of those municipalities. Plus, I mean, this is, the bipartisan issue is hating Dan Snyder in all 3 voting areas. So, like, there's no political will to give this guy what he wants. So the NFL is banking that those three municipalities hold firm, and then they can just sit on all. They're not going to give him the $200 million buy-in or whatever that they get when they build a new stadium. They won't raise his debt ceiling. So I think they also think if they can squeeze play him there between themselves and the DMV governments, I think that's their other path.
Yeah, well, it's more pressure is what it is. Everything can happen all at once. They can pressure him with the votes. They can pressure him with the finances. Let me explain, and this real estate stuff is kind of my world. Let me explain about the NFL part of it. So when Chris says $200 million, what normally happens is that the NFL donates out of the goodness of their hearts about $200 million to ownership for stadium projects. Or not to ownership, it's the construction project, and so that's just another funding source. They don't have to do that; they just do it out of the goodness of their hearts. And in this case, the ownership of the NFL could just refuse to do it, and so he would lose that funding, of it. And the thing about the debt ceiling is that the NFL governance documents only allow a certain percentage of debt by owners. And the reason why they do this is they don't want like Bank of America to foreclose on the Seattle Seahawks or whatever. They want to keep it at a level where that's not at risk. And if the worst happened, the ownership could take care of it. And that's why there's a debt ceiling. They already waived it once for him when he bought out his minority partners, and it was a lot of money. It was like $700 million, I think it was.
And so they loaned him money, so that's going to come due at some point too.
Yes, that's exactly right. So they already waived it once, and so what Chris is talking about is simultaneously say we're not giving you the $200 million, we're not going to allow you to increase your debt total, and that right there is kind of the ball game in terms of the stadium, because if he can't borrow the money, I mean, what do you do? I mean, it's done because this is a project like this, even conservatively. It's $1 billion to build a stadium. Forget about even if you're just doing a stadium alone, without a big corporate commercial real estate development around it, you're talking $1 billion at least. So if he doesn't get $800 million from the state of Virginia or the state of Maryland, and the state of Virginia, like you said, bipartisan. Originally, when it was proposed in the Virginia legislature, he had the top Republican and the top Democrat behind him. And then they both bailed on him when the public outcry happened. So it's just, like you said, bipartisan, just dead. Maryland made it abundantly clear we ain't giving you a dime, and you're not going to own the land. If you want to build your own stadium here, you're welcome to, but it's beyond your dime. So if he loses $800 million from the state, $200 million from the NFL, and he can't borrow money, there is literally he didn't have. First of all, nobody does major construction on cash. Nobody. But even if he did, he doesn't have it. He doesn't have that kind of money. So it's just kind of game over for that. The lease expires in a couple years. He could probably negotiate with Prince George's County to work out the permitting and all that to extend it. But the stadium's already one of the worst in the NFL, if not the worst. So that's a serious pressure point. And if the ESPN article did a good job of mentioning that Washington's net revenue is already one of the lowest in the NFL.
Let's throw out morals. Let's throw out abusive women. Let's throw out toxic workplaces. Let's throw out all of that stuff. Then probably the number, if Washington was killing it, the owners would look the other way on all of that stuff. But the reality is he is costing the league a lot of money at this point. He is not pulling his weight, right? Like, in the revenue sharing setup of the NFL, the 32 owners, it's very easy to make money because of the TV deals, but at the same time, you're beholden to the other 31 to pull your weight. And he is a sinkhole, and it's not a sinkhole in St. Louis, right? It's not a sinkhole somewhere else. This is I think, depending how you count it, DC is the 6th, 7th biggest media market in the country. It's the nation's capital, so it was a storied franchise. This isn't some 30-year-old franchise, right? So the league is better when Washington is a strong franchise. That is, no one would debate that. And the league is hurting when they're a sinkhole. And I think to some degree, they can't put up with this anymore. Just from a pure business standpoint, they can't afford this to continue much longer in Washington, D.C. They cannot have a franchise perform like this.
I don't think they want to have a franchise perform like this. They could. League isn't going to die without Washington being at the top of the revenue list.
No, but it hurts.
Yeah, it hurts, and they don't want to. And you're right. I mean, my former fandom and Chris's current fandom aside, this is a 100-year-old, 90-year-old franchise
90, yeah.
that has 5 championships, and it has some of the most venerable names in NFL history associated with it, going all the way back to Sammy Baugh. So yeah, I think it hurts revenue-wise for sure, and I do think that the women and all that stuff factor into it, because you combine it all. And it's just a headache the NFL doesn't need. And they know what's happened. They're not dumb. I mean, they see how far the franchise has fallen under this guy's leadership, but the money is far more important. And what's gone a bit under the radar is the allegation that was raised in the congressional hearing, or investigation rather, about the team's alleged cooking the books on reported revenue. And what that was about, if you recall, is one of the witnesses in the congressional investigation said Washington keeps 2 sets of books, and what they are allegedly doing is taking revenue from a Redskins game and attaching it to concerts, because the concert revenue is local revenue, is kept, whereas the NFL revenue has to be reported, and most of it, not all, but most of it's shared. And so basically, it's what the allegation was, is more or less that they're failing to report all the revenue. And there were some emails in there where, one of the execs said, yeah, just, put it on Taylor Swift, meaning a Taylor Swift concert at the stadium. And it's really unclear, one, if that's true, and 2, if true, how much it is. But that's another thing. And I think that if that was all there was, Snyder could get out of that and just say, hey, we screwed up. Whoops. Sorry. And, I'm going to pay it all back with interest. And that would be that. But it's like the totality of the circumstances, it's another thing. And what do billionaires care most in the world about? Getting more billions. And so I think that's the biggest thing, because a lot of these owners have similar problems. They're just better at hiding it. And they're better with their public facing persona. Like Jerry Jones has had a lot of the same allegations that Snyder's had in terms of
active lawsuits right now.
Yeah, exactly. But he's better at just squashing it, and he's not nearly the only one. So, but they care about that, but it's more the totality of the circumstances, I think, than anything. So the pressure points. So what we see here, a multi-phase attack. We see an owner stand up and tell the public, yeah, we ought to vote him out. And he said, use the word consider, but you don't say something like that and not mean vote out. Then you have the finance part of it. He's losing this money. And the NFL, that's not an accident. It's in that ESPN article. The NFL told ESPN to say it. And then you have the stadium stuff. Your stadium sucks. You can't get another one built. It's a 3-phase. This is a coordinated effort to put pressure on Dan Snyder. And then the last one is like what you said. It's a combination of what we've both been saying. The ownership eventually goes to him and says, the gig is up. We have the votes. You can go quietly or you can go loudly. And now Dan is...
He keeps getting them sued, too.
Yeah. And then Dan is... The question is, how does Dan take it? Because he's obnoxious. He is... I'm not talking about personally, but in the way he handles his persona and the way the team has always acted, and he does not go quietly at all. He's not going quietly. So at that point, when he hears that, does he go nuclear? Or does he just fade away? And we may find out pretty soon.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think this is getting any quieter. Is an easy prediction to make.
It could, if Washington mysteriously turned into a winning team, which doesn't seem likely from an on-the-field perspective. They kind of suck this year like they do every year. But if they would, that would solve a lot of problems. And if somehow a miracle happened and he did manage to get financing for a stadium, get that built, that might solve the other problem. So those are the two ways he can save himself. And let me just tell people how this major construction works just real quick. So if you're trying to build like a stadium, or think like major shopping mall, office building. So nobody pays cash for these things. What you do is you go get construction financing, normally in sort of 2 or 3 other sources. And I've been involved in deals like this. You put it all together, they will require you to have an equity injection, meaning you have to put some cash up. So then the building gets built, it takes 2 years, and then they transition to permanent financing, because they're paying interest only during the construction period, and then it goes to 30-year financing. So if it's, say, a $2 billion project for Dan, well, they're going to require him to put a couple $100 million up. Assuming he could even get that together, then he's losing $1 billion in free money from the state and the NFL, so that he needs to have finance. So he's looking at financing, like, if it's a $2 billion project, probably $1.8 billion. The debt service on $1.8 billion is more than the team's annual revenue. So then he's talking about, now he's got to have a major real estate management issue to manage and operate a huge commercial mixed-use real estate development. Does he have the expertise to do that at all? He's not a real estate guy in any way. He has no team. He'd have to partner with a major national real estate company to do that. And again, who wants to work with him? So all of that is very, very tough for him. But I think that's his way out. If you want a way out, the way out is win on the field by hook or by crook, get a stadium built. If he does those two things, I think they'd excuse all his personal foibles.
I probably agree with that in a vacuum. I think that's sort of almost inarguable. I'd say a couple things. One, I'm not sure. Well, actually, who cares? I don't even need to speculate on this. This is where I think we know. If I was 75 pounds lighter and had a younger face and was 6'1", I could maybe be a movie star.
Exactly. I could be dating a Victoria's Secret model if I was only taller and richer and better looking.
Right. So like you can, those things are easy to say, right? But like, so if you take the win on the field, get a franchise quarterback, get a new stadium, some combination of maybe even one of those silver bullets, there is absolutely zero evidence that any of those things have even a remote chance of happening, right? I mean, even the stadium, which theoretically, might be even more realistic than a franchise quarterback or multiple winning seasons, because it's not just we're not talking 10-6 and we scratched our way into.
No, I'm talking about becoming the Buccaneers.
Yeah, right. We're talking about consistent winning, and even I think the toxicity is so high that would even take a little while to have effect, I think, on the way that you would. Well,
nobody would believe it.
Right. But it's not going to happen. We have 23 years of evidence that this guy is incapable of, those things are hard, right? These are hard things to do, and with talented, competent people, right? So someone who's incompetent, petty, and all the things that Snyder is, these are impossible things to do. So yes, of course, there are magic wands out there, but guess what? Magic wands don't exist.
No, yeah, and just to be clear, I don't think any of that's going to happen. But if you want the whole complete argument, that's what would have to happen. And Chris is right. I mean, what are the odds that any of that's going to happen? Like, very, very small. Well, you want to? I can 5%. I don't know, but
if we look at the stadium, which might be the most viable, and I still think is a Hail Mary pass. His path, if the NFL and the DMV governments do their squeeze play, is he still, his one chip, is he still got 49% of the team to sell, right? He's now, because a couple years ago when the NFL inexplicably made him the sole owner and totally bailed him out. I mean, Goodell has got himself in a situation. The way he handled.
They just at that time said, we're not giving you a dime, and put him pressure on him then. I never understood it.
They, between the Beth Wilkinson and the minority owner fight, they lost. They actually gave up a huge amount of leverage already. It's just Dan Snyderness that allows them to gain leverage again. But like they really missed golden opportunities already. But So Goodell's really painted himself into a corner here, but he can sell the 49% and raise capital that way. I mean, that's still an asset. Now, I would still contend maybe that's not a Hail Mary pass with seconds to go, but I still think it's a 4th and 25 because that would have depended on a few things. One, a minority non-controlling stake is not that attractive to the kind of people that you need to attract, right? Just even with a generic owner X. Now who wants to get into business with Dan Snyder at that level for an uncontrolling minority? Like,
well, it's yes. And why would Dan want somebody like that in the building? It's kind of like inviting the 6'3" model to live in your guest room, for your girlfriend to drool over, I mean, that's a terrible analogy, but I don't mean it to be sexist, but do it the other way if you want. But point is, Dan does not want somebody looking over his shoulder who the NFL is just dying to replace you. He doesn't want to do that. He may have no choice, but I think you're right. Nobody wants to do business with this guy. Nobody wants to do business with this guy at all. He's just toxic. And so it's an option, but I think that's just as unrealistic as anything else.
Totally. I totally agree. And you don't even have to look at his track record as an NFL owner. Look at Paramount Studios. Look at King's Dominion. Look at Johnny even
Rockets,
what if you're a smart business person, then you're not looking at that as a great opportunity. And I know that a lot of people have said, well, and he's, you've seen this with Jason Wright and you've seen this with some, they love to brag about it, right? Their diversity and all that. So you could see like, oh, well, we're going to give the first opportunity to a 49% share to a minority owner. Any smart advisor out there looking to increase minority ownership would say, this ain't the path.
Well, yeah, and that's not the end game. It shouldn't be. It is for some people, but
no, I just think they maybe that's where he could get it.
No, I agree, but the end game ought to be a competent franchise.
Yeah.
Competently run franchise. And, I think Washington brags a bit too much about the current state of their organization.
Oh, yeah. We had the greatest HR department over the last quarter.
Yeah, exactly. And it hasn't helped at all, but, it's been great since 5 minutes ago. Well, wonderful. Good for you. And nobody ought to think that Jason Wright is in this for the long term. That dude is going to be in the NFL front office, in some senior executive role in 5 minutes from now. He really will
the ESPN article definitely told me that he was basically La Famina Part 2.
Yeah, and I first of all also think that this is just me speculating, but I think Jason Wright was probably forced on Snyder.
No, that's what I mean. So was La Famina. Like these were more league interventions. Hey, take this guy and he can clean it up. Oh, you botched that with La Famina. Take this up and coming black executive, then you can get that juice as well, and we'll try again. But yes, those are the league saying, those are the league trying to clean up before we got to where we are now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And again, I just don't think Jason Wright is long for Washington. And certainly not if he's smart.
I saw a great theory that said, did you notice how clear the messaging was about Jason Wright in that ESPN article? It was clear to this analysis that Jason Wright, or with someone with Jason Wright's permission, was one of the major sources for that article. He comes out smelling like a rose.
I don't know if he was a source, but it was clearly the NFL trying to promote his competence and abilities. Say it like that. I don't know if he literally was the source of the article. I don't know if I agree with that, because Dan Snyder might have him executed if that ever happened. So what's I guess the question really then is twofold. One, is this going to get Dan Snyder out? And two, when? And I'll give my answer and you give yours. I think that I'd love to say this is going to have Dan Snyder get gone soon, but I'll believe it when I see it. I'm going to say he survives this somehow. I'm going to say some other NFL calamity will happen that will cause everybody to forget about him on a national level. And then we'll move into an off season, and then, that'll be that.
I think we have begun the end. I think the end has begun, but I think it's going to be, it's going to be it's going to be Napoleon pulling out of the Russian winter, right? It's going to be slow. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be bloody. So I think, yes, I think we have begun the end game, but I think the end game could really drag on here. So I don't think he survives, but I think he survives for a while, and I think it's going to be tough.
And to continue with your Napoleon analogy, if that happens, then they're literally going to ship him off to an island in the Med.
Right. Yeah, right.
I mean, that's what happened to Napoleon. They shipped him off to an island in the Mediterranean by himself. And Dan's got that boat that seems to always be in the Mediterranean. Alex, he's my Hogsty partner, loves to follow some Twitter site that
the
follows
Snyder's
the
yacht.
boat. Yeah. So that's what's going to happen to him. He's going to literally, and he's about as tall as Napoleon was too.
That's right. Yeah, it works on many levels.
It does.
So I don't think he survives, but I think he might survive.
I think it's going to be a while. Is the thing.
A couple years.
Yeah, I guess that's more what I was real saying. I mean, if you want him gone tomorrow, I just don't think that's going to happen, because I think it's a slow burn, and other things are going to happen, and people forget about it in the news for a while, and then this Mary Jo White investigation will come out. It'll be pressure again, but it's going to take Dan a while to accept defeat.
Unless they've got a buyer, like let's just say, it's Jeff Bezos on the sideline with $6.5 million. The owners passed the hat and raised another half. They sweeten that pot, whatever. If they can have all that lined up, and then they go into a room and say, you'd be turning down $7.5 billion. Like here, like if they just go kind of big, and then we'll see. But I think they're almost gonna. They're almost gonna have to blow them away with an offer. I think is the path to a quick exit. And his pettiness and all of that, I think, make it too high a bar.
I don't know if I was in this situation, if I would care a whole lot between 5 and 7 billion. Because at one point, does it just not matter? I mean, for me, I'm not motivated like that. But if somebody handed me 5 million in my dignity and 7 billion in my shame, I'd probably take the 5. I don't know. I mean, maybe when you're that rich, maybe it does matter, and it's ego and everything, I guess. But I don't get it. And does everybody realize that Jeff Bezos has got a pretty bad reputation himself? I know a lot of Washington fans are begging for Bezos, and I mentioned this on the Hogsty. And I guess in Alex's theory was it's because there's a Amazon headquarters in Arlington, and I guess, but Bezos is a very tough guy to work for. Things aren't necessarily going to get better if Bezos rolls in. I hope people understand that.
Well, I think they get better. This is such a funhouse mirror situation. I've often said, can we just get a normal evil billionaire, please? I just want generic horrible billionaire X. Which to me is what, if you're putting a name to that, that's Bezos.
And can you imagine the last thing here? What is going through Tanya Snyder's head?
I've often said that my acceptable halfway house is divorce Tanya and kids, keep the team. He's out completely. I wouldn't love it. There would be problems. You always have to guess about influence through the kids or whatever. But I think if she's had enough, and and the divorce either forces a sale because they have to pay out the divorce, or she gets the team, I wouldn't love it, but I would take my medicine on that and be okay.
The problem with that, though, is I'd bet my life that there's a prenup. And I bet it was a long time.
They've been married a long time, though.
I know, but he was wealthy.
Wealthier.
Yeah. You're wealthier. Yeah. Because you made a good point, which is to say every business he's had is cratered. Does everybody understand that investors initiated a hostile takeover of Six Flags because Dan Snyder was so awful they wanted to get rid of him? He didn't just sell Six Flags. It was a hostile corporate takeover. you know, and then Johnny Rockets was a thing, and now it's not a thing. And Paramount, I don't know what happened with Paramount, but he got run out of there in 5 minutes. He made like
And
one
Red
movie.
Zebra went
Yeah,
belly
Red
up or
Zebra
whatever.
blew up and died. So like everything's turned to stuff. But but just for Tanya, it's like there's the stories of Dan and hookers on boats, and it's not, and trying to coerce women into his limousine, and whether or not any of that's true, and it seems like the hooker thing probably is true at a minimum. Um, what is going through her head? Like, how much embarrassment is she going to take before she just pulls up and hires the best divorce lawyer she can find?
And you wonder if the NFL ponies up to her. She's probably got some. She's been showing up at these things for
She
a
seems
while.
competent. She's probably not a bitch. Look, at the end of the day, she's a model. Okay, she's not a business person, but she's been a decent face of the franchise. Her husband, if you ignore him,
Yeah, I call this the 1st and 10 scenario, because if you're old like me and you remember HBO's very first scripted TV show was Delta Burke as a wife who inherits an NFL team
you got
from
me
her
on
husband.
years, man. I don't remember that at all.
Yep, it was their very first scripted show, 1st and 10, and it was just the exact scenario: clueless, hot babe, like wife, it gets team, and then sitcom ensues.
Well, that's exactly right. That is exactly it. Because this isn't Tanya's ball game. She's been the kept, and I don't mean this as a disparaging remark against her, but just she's been the kept billionaire wife, and she's forced into the circumstances. Is she good enough to adapt? It's hard to say now, but she puts on a good public face at a minimum.
Yeah, so we'll see. I mean, we've obviously talked about this a good amount, and we will continue, and we have, and all of that. So, but there was other news or other battles or other palace intrigue at the owners meeting. We've talked about this story a number of times, but are we at a resolution about who the heck pays St. Louis their $751 million?
I think it was 790 million. So yeah, we do have a resolution now, and that Stan Kroenke has got about 600, and the other owners have got the rest. So we talked about this a year ago, maybe on this show.
Yeah, when
Think
the
about
settlement came down, I think.
So what has happened here, to summarize, is that when Stan Kroenke moved the Cardinals to Los Angeles from St. Louis did not take kindly to this and filed a massive lawsuit in St. Louis that alleged that Kroenke had breached his various agreements with the city of St. Louis by moving the team early, basically. Basically, they're defaulting on the stadium and the associated agreements. And the NFL started losing this lawsuit, in intermediate local hearings and kind of lower level steps and whatnot. It looked like they were going to lose. And so a year ago, then Kroenke negotiated a $790 million settlement. Now, the interesting part was that there was an indemnity agreement, which I tried to find this morning before the show and could not find it. But the indemnity agreement, according to the NFL, the indemnity agreement said that Kroenke indemnifies the NFL for costs and expenses associated with him moving from St. Louis to Los Angeles. And for those who aren't legal types or business types, indemnity is a promise by one party to pay the expenses of another party in the event that liability ensues. So if there's like you indemnify your landlord for, I'm just making something up, but you may have an indemnity agreement wherein you indemnify your landlord that if somebody, a crime happens on the property while you're renting it, then you're going to indemnify the landlord and you're going to pay his expenses if he gets sued. That's what the agreement was. So the NFL said, hey, Kroenke, you owe us all this. You owe all the money in this lawsuit because of this indemnity agreement. Kroenke made an argument that the indemnity was the opposite. Now, what I can't remember, because I haven't read it in a year, the indemnity was, as an attorney, was pretty clear, but I can't remember what side I thought it was clear in favor of. So I'll try to find it. But point is, what has happened this past week, that this debate has gone on for a year. And then meantime, the NFL was afraid that this lawsuit was going to get dredged back up and they were going to get slaughtered at trial. So they pressured Kroenke into settling it. Kroenke finally did settle it. He agreed to pay a little less than $600 million, and the other NFL owners, are each putting up about $7 million each, and then that's the rest of it. So just goes to show, by the way, that when you're an owner that's valuable to the NFL and you cost the NFL money, they will forgive you. And if Stan Kroenke is very rich, he's very competent. He's probably the second richest owner in the NFL. He developed the stadium, and so he gets the NFL in a $1 billion lawsuit, and they were mad at him, but they're not mad enough to get him gone. So the bottom line is Kroenke 600, NFL 200.
I saw somewhere that Forbes had estimated his net worth as around north of 12 billion. If you just want some context,
he's a major real estate developer. Yeah. He's developed like big sports complex, and he's a guy who could do what Dan Snyder wants to do.
He is such an interesting foil to Dan Snyder, right? Because got himself in a mess of trouble, cost the league money, definitely didn't handle things right, blah 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 blah. But they just in the end, they just all kind of laugh about this. They figure out what everyone, and they move on because of all the things that you just mentioned. So you can even, that's how high the revenues are. And that's also how high their tolerance is for malfeasance. Now, this isn't, this is slightly different and legal in business, and there are rulings and stuff. So it's not necessarily driven by, evil deeds or whatever. But at the same time, this caused the NFL a ton of grief. It caused them a ton of lawsuits. It caused them a ton of money. And still, it's like, all right, well, let's just figure out where we can all accept this and move on with you as one of our cornerstone owners.
Yeah, they were looking at $1 billion judgment. Billion with a B, billion. And because of all the reasons we just said, it's okay. And Kroenke's kept his personal conduct above board. So there's no issue that he's out there, slapping secretaries on the butt or dumb things like that. There's no allegations that he's peeping at cheerleaders and terrible misconduct. The Rams have been good. They ended up in the Super Bowl. They're not embarrassing the league. SoFi Stadium, if I had to take a stab at it, I'd say that's probably between that and the stadium in Dallas are probably the two biggest revenue generators in the league.
Yeah, it's the NFL's biggest new cathedral for sure.
Yes.
They just did the Super Bowl. It is their crown jewel stadium. In fact, even a little bit more than Dallas, because Dallas is such Jerry world, right? It's so probably associated with Jerry Jones. The SoFi feels like it, because of its two teams, because of how we got there. It almost feels like a league stadium.
I'm talking about just revenue, though.
Yeah,
I agree with all that, but just revenue, it's probably those two, and then maybe the Meadowlands, just because it's in New York, or whatever did they call it the Meadowlands still? Whatever that place is called.
It's like
now.
The Meadowlands facility, yeah.
Yeah, whatever it is. But anyway, so there's all of that. So that's that. So this St. Louis will be made whole. He's not paying $600 million in cash. He's paying it in tranches over some unstated period of time. So meaning he's going to have to pay $30 million here and 20 some regular amount over a number of years. But that makes the NFL happy, and as long as he makes the payments, all will be well with Stan Kroenke. So that is the way. For those of you who are interested in buying an NFL team, because I know all of you are, this is the way to act. Okay, you could fight with the NFL for a while, but eventually you need to make them whole. And if you're competent and a quality owner who, more importantly, makes them money, you have a much larger leash than if you don't.
Yeah. I mean, let's call it the Al Davis rule, right? He fought with the league and all that, but he still ran a successful franchise. I mean, I know he got a little old at the end and his kid's an idiot, but he made the NFL money. He helped build the AFL. So they could get into all kinds of battles and suing each other and stuff. It didn't really hurt his overall standing.
The apple fell pretty far from the tree with Steven. Was his name Steven Davis?
Yeah. He looks like Dumb and Dumber.
He really does. Yeah, he looks exactly like Dumb and Dumber, and he acts like Dumb and Dumber too. But yeah, Davis. Don't forget. I mean, Davis sued the NFL. He was in a huge war.
I think multiple times, right?
Yeah, for like a decade or more. But he was valuable. He was making money, and for all his faults, again, you didn't have all the personal conduct stuff with him either. And there were no allegations that Davis was peeping in the shower, at cheerleaders or any of that. So yeah, that's a good example. That's a good example. Another one.
Um, well, there's actually much news, but another really interesting piece of news, especially since we're sort of tracking this Amazon entering the NFL. That was one of big story of the year. We talked about it before the season kicked off. We're kind of monitoring it as it goes on. They announced that starting next year in the 2023 season, we will get a Black Friday game, which, if you don't know, Black Friday is the day after Thanksgiving. It's the biggest, shopping day of the year. It kicks off now. It is basically the biggest, like 3 or 4 days of shopping, yada, yada. So here we have Amazon. Who was it? 9 billion for 7
I think it
years
was
or something
8
like
billion.
that? Yeah, so more than $1 billion a year, I think, for the amount of years it covers. So they got a big investment. So far, it seems to be going well. I mean, they got unlucky with a couple, turd games, but I don't think that hurt their overall
Ratings were up on the turd games.
So who cares? And now, so the world's biggest retailer, right? Like that's a pretty fair statement, I would imagine, at this point.
It's factually accurate.
Yeah. Gets one of the biggest attention drivers on the face of the earth to basically open up a direct-to-consumer sales pipeline on Black Friday, and really going through Cyber Monday, which is they run deals now for a 2-week window, but like the real hot action time is basically Thanksgiving night through Tuesday morning.
So Chris proposes story. Our process, when we get near showtime, we kick some story ideas around there. And Chris proposed this, and my initial reaction to him was like, so, okay, and so they're adding a game, so what? And then you made the point, which was such a good point, which is what you just said, which is, hey, look, this is a direct sales pitch, a direct sales action right here. You get people on Amazon on Black Friday. They're watching a game. They're ordering from Amazon. It's like a marketing nuclear explosion, basically, because like it's if you know how like a nuclear fission bomb works, there's a nuclear trigger that the trigger that sets off the big bomb is also nuclear detonation, but it's a very small one, and then that causes the bigger one. So think of the NFL game as the small trigger that causes the big one to happen. That's what this is. And so that is such a good point. And then also, as you pointed out, now we have football on Thursday morning, almost to Monday night, depending on what Saturday happens. And neither of us have looked. It's NFL action all the way through it. Now, I have always said, Chris, that the NFL, one thing the NFL does not do very well, they don't understand that you need to leave people wanting more. like if you like good musical acts sort of understand this, and they'll put out an album or a song, then they go away for a year or two, and not long enough to people forget about them, but long enough to where people want more. And the NFL will just mercilessly drive it into your head all the time. And so it's having football Thursday through Monday night, to me, is a bit much in terms of, we'll find out if I'm wrong, but to me, it almost seems like it's too much.
Well, I mean, not that she's some bellwether, but I told my wife this the other day, and she immediately like threw the dish that she was washing into the sink and be like, "You got to be kidding me!"
Because her husband's going to be watching football.
Yeah,
for
it's like, this is
5
too
days.
much. Yeah, and it was like, what? So, and I was like, oh, whatever. I don't think I've watched the first 2 games on Thanksgiving in 10 years, because I'm usually cooking.
Alex and I have had to watch Redskin games, seems like every year on Thanksgiving, and we hate those games.
Oh, I hate when Washington plays on Thanksgiving. I totally agree. But I don't know if they'll get their act together by 2023, but I can totally see you're sitting down and watching that Black Friday game, which you already have to have that you have to have a Prime subscription to watch that game. So already we got a double driver for Prime subscriptions. Watch the game, get the sales deals, right? So that's a pretty good 1-2 punch in terms of why you should get Amazon Prime from a sales pitch perspective. I guarantee you they will be selling you you will get one-click buy. In fact, with the TVs nowadays, you just hit a button and talk. You'll be able to talk into your remote control and say,
order paper towels.
Yes, right? Or order team specific gear, right? Or order whatever they're selling, you know, in the commercial break. And like, you know, you'll just talk into your remote and you will order yourself whatever it is. And you mean, it's going to be you know, home when we were kids, right? Like home shopping network and all of that. This is going to be the home shopping network on, you know, in outer space on steroids.
The credit card companies are rubbing their hands together.
Right. Everyone gets paid. So I'm really curious to see how that plays out. And it's one thing the other networks are going to have. You know, we talk about like why streaming and all of that. It's going to be something where the other networks, they can't do this, right? Like they can obviously get huge ad sales, but they don't have this vertical integration.
I don't think everybody totally understands how big Amazon is. Amazon is bigger than the entire NFL by a lot. Okay? Amazon could buy and sell every team in the NFL simultaneously. They're huge. I mean, huge. It's not an exaggeration to say they are the biggest marketplace in the world by far. I mean, it's not even close. Even like Walmart pales in comparison to Amazon. So yeah, I think you're going to get to the point where you're going to watch the ad and go, order this product. Press a button, order this product, because you're already signed in through Amazon. It's going to automatically be ordered, and it'll be at your house the next day.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And then you tell people, you know, you don't have to get trampled by morons lining up outside of you know, your big box store X on, you know, Friday morning at 8. Just watch the football game.
Yeah. Buy the Samsung TV.
Yeah.
Alexa. Isn't Alexa Amazon?
The Samsung Frame is an excellent TV if you want a product pitch by me.
I have a bunch of Samsung TVs in my house. I do think
I like Samsung TVs. All right, well, Steve, we covered a lot here.
We skipped a bunch of stories.
Right, yeah, this is not where we're looking for, like, you know, a new flavor of Gatorade being endorsed by Damon Green or whatever. So sometimes we have to scrape the barrel, but the NFL though is a constant generator, and Dan Snyder is a constant generator. And if both of our guesses are right, and this is not a quick process, it'll just keep giving us stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Hashtag content.
What is going on in the morgue watch of the Hogsty right now?
Well, you know, it seems like we're kind of transitioning into the death watch. The death watch,
draft watch, we'll call it. It'd be nicer.
The season is on hospice, you know, Karen. We're just waiting on the end, basically. But fortunately, the show is far more entertaining now because we have one show a week in which we can talk about all kinds of things rather than recap some blowout. So it's I think you have far more reason to listen to the Hogsty than you did. And we have Rick Snyder's show Seasons of Discontent, which, except for this week when Matt Cohn's Hi Matt forgets to upload the file, that is 2 times a week. So we have that, and then we have all of our regular written content.
Well, there you go. And for all of you still Washington football team fans, enjoy the second verse of the Ballad of Taylor Heineke.
It's not going to go well.
Well, I said to my brothers the other day, at least we don't have to watch him do the ill-fated Lambeau leap this time.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's that.
Small victories. All right, Steve, I'll see you in 2 weeks.